I know that if I walk in, there are two mosques in London, as you know, and if I walk into either of those two mosques, that I might have to pay a bitter price.
Such as?
Because I am identified as a person who has questioned, challenged, and talked about and written about things which the people in the mosque and the post people in the mosque who control the mosque believe that I have crossed the boundary and I am more or less an apostate from Islam. So to be a dissident Muslim to the people who are practicing quote unquote official Islam, as the people in the mosque do, a dissident Muslim becomes an apostate.
Are you fearing for your safety?
I don't any longer, but I remain cautious about it. I don't want to wave a red flag in front of a bull, as they say. I don't belong to any mosque. I'm not an imam. I don't belong to any political party. Maybe I did once. I carry no membership with any institution and organization, except that I'm connected with some of these think tanks, but these think tanks are just like universities where people exist, come together, share ideas, write, and then go away.
But you're also a Muslim immigrant from Pakistan. What are your thoughts on this day?
Let me just say one thing. Western values are universal value. The Japanese want them, the Indians want them, the Chinese want them. That's the struggle.
All humanity wants them.
All but it was planted in the West, it grew in the West, it was nourished in the West. The problem is, will the West sustain and maintain its value, or will it be overrun?
You're brown, you have an accent, you're an immigrant, you're a Muslim. You can say things without being called racist, without being called anti-Muslim, Islamophobe, but if a white male were to say those things, would they not be denounced as a hater?
But that's precisely the problem that we are faced with, the whole problem of political correctness, language police. It is not the content that matters. Look at the way the word discriminate has been hijacked. Discriminate was a perfect English word.
We
discriminate to choose.
Yeah,
to
he had discriminating taste. It was a compliment.
Discriminating taste. Discrimination in what we read, in how we understand the world. And that word has been taken away to give it the idea that a person who discriminates is a racist, is a bigot. Well, what we take for granted had to be paid for by blood of many generations of people. And ironically, it might have to be defended by blood if this generation, and my generation, is fading away. And I sometimes wonder, the quicker we fade away, the better, because we are the most corrupt generation. We are the generation that is the most spoiled generation, because we never understood the meaning of freedom as it should have been understood. And that freedom hangs on an end of a thread. It can be snuffed out. That's the struggle we are in. And Islam today has been, in a way, confounded and abused and perverted, not by anybody else, but by Muslims themselves, because of the inversion of all the entire meaning. Because we do not have much memory. And when we do have memory, we do not have much sobriety. And when we have sobriety, we do not have the depth of understanding. We lack the humility. And we read back our current situation into all of history with fog and mist of bigotry and hate inside of us. We cannot read what is sacred and understand what it is. A text can be read in many different ways, and it is read in many different ways. The world itself, the universe itself, is a text. And the author of the world and the universe as a text is God himself, because he's the creator. And this text, that is the world, was read in many different ways. There are two mosques over here in this city. I cannot go to either of them, because none will invite me and none will sit and discuss with me. In the Arab Muslim world, the text, the Quran, is received and read and understood through this wall of mist and passion and fog, and it is all ultimately that which is being read, and the sound The words that Muslims daily repeat, merciful God, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, is totally lost. The Quran says the best in the eyes of God are the ones with the best conduct. The Muslims today, almost without exception, I must say, because the voices of those who would stand up and speak are being suffocated, silenced, killed in the Arab Muslim world.
Do you ever feel, I mean, you're speaking out firmly for Western values against Islamic radicalism. Have you ever felt
I am
threatened?
speaking out firmly for freedom, which is my value, which is the value I see within Islam that was denied by the Islamists, right, going back historically to the very origins of Islam.
Now, you were born in Calcutta, India. And could you take us through your journey from a boy in Calcutta to where you are today as an associate professor of political science in Canada?
My education was in both places. Part of the education was in Calcutta, part of the education was in East Pakistan. Both Jesuit schools. I went to Jesuit school. My parents sent me to Jesuit school. They had themselves gone to Jesuit school. My father passed away when I was very young. I was 10, 11 years old. And soon after that, a few years after that, in my teenage years, came the breakup of Pakistan in 1971, which was a horrendous civil war, almost a genocidal war. I was able to escape. Some of other members of my family were able to escape. We found our refuge in Calcutta, in my grandparents' home. And then from there, I came to North America. I came to the States, came to Canada. I had a number of my relatives in Canada who sponsored me. And the Canadian government, given the circumstances that people were going through, acted very swiftly with people who were displaced people like myself, my family. And so I ended up in Canada and been in Canada since early 1974.
Now, you've evolved, haven't you, in your political and philosophic beliefs? You were telling me earlier that you studied Marx and Mao to a great degree. Were you a Maoist at one point in time? And if so, how did you change to the person you are today? And what was that kernel of truth that showed you the way from Maoism to your liberal views today?
You grow up, with a beef. And the beef is against everybody. Beef is against your family, against your parents, against the circumstances. This is a natural thing, Grew up in an environment where China was seen and Mao Zedong was seen as a great liberator, So how did I come to this position, you're asking? Well, it comes out as a result of experience, of living a life experience, and then questioning one's own thoughts, one's own, what one has read, and then going out and looking at the world, testing it, checking it out. I had the good fortune to travel a lot. And I came to realize the lies, the bucket full of lies that is what Maoism and Marxism and Leninism is. And people readily drink into these lies, as I as a youth drank into it, because it looks so attractive, because it gives one quick, ready answer to immense, complex reality of the world. It gave very simple answer, that the answer lies in the class enemy. And if you identify your class enemy and eliminate your class enemy, you have solved your problem, Well, now we know that this man is responsible for about 100 million people that he killed through the Cultural Revolution and the great leap forward of the 1950s, 1940s, and Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. When Obama began to run for the office in 2008, and I started looking into his record, I had great suspicion about this man. And the past nearly 4 years have only confirmed those suspicions and made it deeper. One of the great ironies of our time that the freest society, or reputedly the freest society, in principle the freest society, would elect a man like Obama to be its president.
We cannot talk about the most important cutting issues of our time because of multiculturalism. This is not simply an abstract issue that we are discussing. This is a public policy issue. The big elephant in our room is immigration, for instance. Nobody can touch the issue of immigration because to talk about immigration would be to become a bigot. And so we are faced today with an immense totalitarian challenge, the challenge of Islamism. That's the elephant in our room, and no one can talk about it, and no one is willing to talk about it. And anybody who's going to talk about it is going to be vilified. You will be called bigot. You will be called Islamophobe.
The mosque is a party. Islamism is a party ideology. These are the people who have reduced Islam into a political ideology. They have sucked the religion out of what is its spiritual core and replaced it with politics. I see Harper today as one of the very few leaders, if not the only leader in the West, who has taken some very courageous stand on the issues of our time. And the issues of our time since 9/11 is the issue of Islamism. This is the third great totalitarian movement in the world that is threatening not only the West, but most importantly, threatening the Muslims themselves. I am a survivor of the genocidal war of people who believe in or who are Islamists.
Because if logically, on the matter of faith, Quran is the word of God, then there is nothing more clear than the Quran itself saying what it says about the Jews and their place in the Holy Land. And we said unto the children of Israel, after him, that is Moses, dwell in the land, but when the promise of the hereafter comes to pass, we shall bring you out as a crowd gathered out of various nations. Remember when Moses said to his people, O my people, remember the favors that God bestowed on you when he appointed apostles from among you and made you kings and gave you what had never been given to anyone in the world. Enter then, my people, the holy land that God has ordained for you, and do not turn back, or you will suffer.
That Mr. Harper's position that he has taken, for instance, his support for the state of Israel, given the amount of animus and animosity directed in the United Nations among the Europeans, including right here in Canada, among a large segment of the society, and in America, is a very courageous stand in contrast to the position of the liberal leadership, the NDP leadership.
9/11, Ezra, in my thinking, in my thoughts and reflection 10 years later, was the symptoms of a civilization negotiating its own demise. That was what terrorism was. No healthy man, no sane man, no healthy culture, no sane culture engages in such self-destructive act as the Arab Muslim world has done and continues to do. So this is a civilization that doesn't have, this is a culture that doesn't have a sense of how it is going to come out of its own vortex, of its own box, and reconcile itself with the world in the 21st century, in the third millennium.
When I arrived, and the circumstances in those days, in the early 70s, it was not as invested, that is the idea of multiculturalism, as it has become in this past 40 years. So when I arrived, the strength of Canada was as a liberal democratic society.
Trudeau was president at the time.
Trudeau was prime minister then, and he had initiated
Prime Minister, sorry.
Yes, he was prime, and he had initiated this policy in 1971, 72. In fact, the most insidious assault on liberal democracy from within, because it is an assault on the notion of individual freedom in the most fundamental sense. And that's a subject in itself, how and why.
You've called it identity politics.
It is identity politics. It is built upon the idea that is so unusual that nobody else had ever bought at this argument ever before. The idea that all cultures are equal.
So, my friends, we are in great, deep trouble. But the first thing is that we must become free. And we can become free if we can get going and repeal multiculturalism. Thank you. The fundamental principle, which is at the heart of liberal democracy, that all men are created equal. All of us as individuals, we are equal. It is individuals that we are equal. Our inequalities as people who are born equal are a reflection of the circumstances of our history, of our birth, the situation in which we find ourselves, and there can be myriads of explanations about that. But the cardinal principle is all men are created equal in that generic sense. I don't want to spend too much time on it because the keystone principle of this argument was, and it went unchallenged, and nobody wants to challenge it today because it's become the political consensus of our time, that all cultures are equal. This is the wonderful 1960s idea. All cultures are equal and all cultures deserve equal respect. And of course, you know it and I know it, deep down in our heart, deep down when we question it, deep down when we want to think about this and in the world in that we're living in, that all cultures are not equal. And you can't say the culture of the Taliban is equal to the culture of that people that lands man on the moon and takes sand and turns it into silicon chip.
Cultures are where people have established a way of living over a period of time. It includes the whole aspect of one's society's ideas and values, religion, the way society works, its history, relationship among people, majority, minority, men and women, and so on and so forth. So, and then the historical achievement of that culture. To say all cultures are equal is to beg the question, what is the criteria by which we judge all cultures equal? Do we judge it on the basis of scientific achievement? Do we judge it on the basis of the philosophical and religious achievement, arts, music, medicine? What is the basis by which? But to me, the most profound basis by which one might want to judge culture is, which is the culture that accords the greatest respect to freedom, and most importantly to individual freedom, because there is no freedom unless the individual is free. So individual freedom. And the culture that accords the greatest respect to freedom would then stand apart from those cultures which do not. No other culture, as I look around me, and in my reading and in my thinking, has given the matter of individual freedom the place as the starting point of its identity, as the West came to do.
The idea of freedom, the very word freedom does not exist in most cultures. The Chinese never had a word for freedom. 5,000-year-old civilization. The Indians didn't have a word for freedom. In Sanskrit, there is no word for freedom. It was a word that would be coined, Shadhinata, much later under the influence of the British. The Arabs didn't have the word for freedom. The word for freedom is hurriya. From the word hur, a hur means an Arab steed, a steed that is free in the desert. And so the Arabs frown upon the word hurriya because they see it as an anarchy. So the word freedom itself has not existed in all cultures. The very idea of freedom emerges in 5th century Greece under very special circumstances, but it emerges there. And it is there, for instance, the first time a man by the name of Protagoras asserts man is the measure of all things and puts man in contrast to the gods and the demons. Man is the measure of all things. And if I fast forward, because of the lack of time, we come into the Middle Ages and the struggle begins anew. And man is the measure of all things. Man is the moral center of the universe. not the Pope, not the Vatican, not the collectivist principle of who is the Imam, or who is the Pharaoh, or who is the emperor and has the mandate of heaven. It is the lonely individual, the solitary person. He is the measure of all things. It's only in a free society where people can talk about being equal. That's why equality was not the fundamental or the first principle in the rights of man struggle. It was liberty. When you have liberty, then we can talk about other things. The world is naturally diverse. It is beautiful. You know, we do not have to go about talking about it as a policy. It's only free people who are equal. You do not find equality where there is no freedom. The men who went out to face the Japs or the Germans, they were not bringing back gold. They were in fact bringing and helping get freedom to the people who have been deprived of that.
And we have shifted away from the idea that Canada is a liberal democracy, which means a whole lot of different things, to the idea that we are a multicultural society, which again means a whole lot of different things.
You wouldn't call multiculturalism as an official policy a part of a liberal democracy? Many would.
Many would, but I don't.
Or what you hear about from the children of today. Do you hold out much hope for the liberal democracy you're fighting for?
I think so, absolutely.
Yeah. You're positive about it?
I can't say that I'm overly confident,